Hoo boy, here's another completely moronic article from a statist making excuses. Sorry, libertarian anarchists, capitalism requires government. If you say that capitalism requires government, then what you're literally saying is peaceful interactions between people require someone to forcefully intrude on them. It's a complete contradiction.
Well, it's not a contradiction when you make dumb assumptions like that. Government only intervenes when there has been a use or a threat of force. As Binswanger points out numerous times, force should only be used in retaliation. And as you guys will see, this is a point that Shane Killian refuses to address.
It's from Harry Binswanger, and that's another name that sounds like it should be an expletive.
Oh, what a knee slapper. You hear that, guys? Harry Binswanger's name sounds like a curse word. In full disclosure, I am a huge fan of Harry Binswanger. I think Harry Binswanger is the greatest living philosopher there is, and I say that mainly because Leonard Peikoff is retired. I am currently reading Harry Binswanger's book, How We Know, which is about epistemology. And for those who don't know what epistemology is, it is the branch of philosophy that deals with things like concept formation and free will and consciousness and focusing your mind and acquiring knowledge and thinking and reason. You know, things that ANCRAPs are in desperate need of.
I defend laissez-faire capitalism using Ayn Rand's objectivism. Well, there's your problem.
Well, there's your problem. So just notice how happy and eager this ANCRAP Shane Killian is to throw Ayn Rand into the garbage as if she were Karl Marx. And I stress this point because a lot of people like to come at me on Twitter, they like to come at me in the comment section on my YouTube videos, where I talk about how taxation is theft, or where I talk about shrinking government, or where I talk about the wonders and virtues of capitalism and free markets. People like to lump me in with the ANCRAPs and the libertarians and the conservatives because we're all about shrinking government. To a lot of people, they see me and they want to lump me in with the ANCRAPs because they see me and they say, oh, this guy wants to shrink government by like 90 to 95%. Meanwhile, the ANCRAPs and the libertarians, they want to shrink government by 100%. So to these people, they're thinking, well, you guys really only disagree on like 5 to 10% of shit. So you guys are pretty much in the same boat. Well, clearly, we have much bigger fundamental disagreements than just the realm of politics. What more proof do you need that ANCRAPs and libertarians hate and dismiss Ayn Rand? In fact, I'm willing to go as far to say that many ANCRAPs, if not most of them, admire a piece of shit like Noam Chomsky more than they admire Ayn Rand. I could be wrong, but if any ANCRAP wants to correct this hypothesis in the comments, feel free.
As it says next to my picture, I defend laissez-faire capitalism. Anti-government is the term leftists use to smear this position. Except it's not a smear. Government is aggression, and capitalism is about removing aggression from our lives.
Well, first off, it is a smear to Harry Binswanger because Harry Binswanger, like most objectivists, do see government as a necessary good. Not a necessary evil, a necessary good. So it would be a smear pertaining to Harry Binswanger. But secondly, government is not necessarily aggression.
And amazingly, some calling themselves libertarians are indeed anti-government across the board. They argue for what they call anarcho-capitalism. Yeah, people actually being consistent and applying their ethical principles universally. How amazing.
ANCRAPs are anything but consistent, as you'll see in this video. But I also want to note why I call these people ANCRAPs rather than what they like to call themselves, which is ANCAP, which is short for anarcho-capitalism, and that is because I do not want to give these people any benefit by complimenting them by suggesting that they are in any way capitalist or capitalistic. There's nothing capitalistic about being an anarchist. Anarchy and capitalism are just flat out incompatible with one another. Hence why I am using the term "ancrap," which is short for anarchist piece of crap, because that's exactly what anarchists are.
Free competition works so well for everything else, these anarchists say. Why not for government services too? But that argument comes from an anti-capitalist premise. Say what?
He said that your premise comes from an anti-capitalist premise, and he's absolutely right. But as you guys will see in this video, Shane Killian fails to address the crucial points made by Binswanger. He relies heavily on strawman arguments and smears and evasion and deflection.
Like the Marxists who prayed about exploitation and wage slavery, the anarchists are ignoring the crucial, fundamental, life and death difference between trade and force. I think that's you, Sunshine. You're the one wanting to use force to intrude on trade.
Except Binswanger never advocates for government getting involved in trade. Again, just another straw man.
Marxists claim that capitalistic acts use force, and they're wrong. They're voluntary interactions. Anarcho-capitalists claim that acts of force can be capitalistic. Oh, we do not. Kiss my hairy Binswanger.
So, note this right here. Killian is adamant about his position that ANCRAPs do not, I repeat, do not advocate for a market in force. Keep that in mind.
Though they come at it from different directions, both ignore or evade the fact that producing and exchanging values is the opposite of physical force. Just what is it about producing and exchanging values that you think capitalists are against? We're in favor of any voluntary interaction. Just don't forcefully intrude on anyone else's voluntary interactions, and we're good.
Alright, so government can be established on the grounds that it can only use force in retaliation, on the agreement that individuals are innocent until proven guilty. What's the problem here?
Production is the creation of value, and trade is the voluntary exchange of value for value to mutual benefit. Force is destruction, or the threat of it. It may be the destruction of a value, as when a hoodlum throws a rock through a store window, or it may be the destruction of destruction, as when a policeman pulls a gun on that hoodlum and hauls him off to jail. But in either case, it is the opposite of wealth creation and voluntary trade. Force properly employed is used only in retaliation, but even when retaliatory, force merely eliminates a negative. It cannot create value. The threat of force is used to make someone obey, to thwart his will. The only moral use of force is in self-defense, to protect one's rights. All of this is perfectly true, and it's in line with anarcho-capitalism. But you are the one saying it requires government. You're the one saying it requires a policeman or a regulator or someone else to pull guns on people to stop them from interacting peacefully.
Binswanger just said that force should only be used in retaliation, which would mean that government would not intervene in transactions in voluntary trade. I honestly can't tell if Killian just flat out fails to understand Binswanger's points, or if he understands them and is just choosing to twist his words and make straw man arguments. Also, I'm curious, does using force in a retaliatory manner violate the non-aggression principle? So say my neighbor is beating his wife and I can hear her screaming in pain and agony. Am I allowed to intervene on her behalf and attempt to rescue her and attempt to save her from further beatings and potentially hospitalization or perhaps even death? Or is only my neighbor's wife allowed to violate the non-aggression principle because it's only her life that is currently at stake? It's only her rights that are being violated. My rights aren't being violated. My neighbor isn't trying to beat me up. So if I'm allowed to use retaliatory force as a means of saving my neighbor's wife, even though my life is not in any immediate danger or threat from my neighbor who's beating his wife, then what's the issue with delegating this responsibility to the government who would use the same force in the same manner? You see, in a rational society, I would just call the police in this situation. I would let the police know what's going on, and the police would show up and apprehend my neighbor, and he would have his day in court to defend himself. But in Ancrap Fantasyland, I guess only my neighbor's wife is allowed to use force because only her rights, only her life is in danger. And if my neighbor happens to beat his wife to death and no one apprehends him, I guess I just have to tolerate living with a murderous neighbor across the street because apprehending him would violate the non-aggression principle.
The wielding of force is not a business function. In fact, force is outside the realm of economics. Economics concerns production and trade, not destruction and seizure. Actually, economics covers all human interaction. It's as much about examining the wealth destroyed by force as it is wealth created by production.
Hence why it's stupid to consider force anything but a negative aspect in the realm of economics. By this logic, we should just dismiss the broken window fallacy because, after all, if someone gets their window broken, you would still measure the cost of fixing the window and the jobs that were created in fixing the window and making the glass and all that stuff, because those are still measurable when assessing economics. Jesus, talk about missing the point.
Ask yourself what it means to have a competition in governmental services. It's a competition in wielding force, a competition in subjugating others, a competition in making people obey commands. That's not competition, it's violent conflict. On a large scale, it's war. But the violent subjugation part is not the part we want competition in. We want that eliminated entirely. It's only the services themselves we want to compete. Let us have competing power companies, competing water companies, competing police services, competing court systems. Let us decide what forces we want to pay to protect our homes and our country from aggressors.
Yeah, Binswanger, Ancraps don't want to market in force, they just want to market in police and courts, which is force. I seriously don't know how I could explain this better than Harry Binswanger already explained it. So if you and your neighbor have a dispute or a disagreement over property or money or whatever, which court do you go to? What happens when your neighbor wants to go to a different court than you do? What if your neighbor finds a court that sides with him on the dispute, whereas you go to a court that sides with you on the dispute? How do you guys settle this dispute? Heck, what's stopping someone from falsely accusing you of like murder or rape or theft, and then they hire their guns, they hire their private police to apprehend you? What are you supposed to do? Do you just hire your own private security to defend yourself against their private police? And again, if there's a competition in courts, who arbitrates this fucking dispute? So on one hand, Killian says that Ancraps don't want a marketplace in force, and on the other hand, he says, yeah, we want a marketplace in force. This is how we would, this is how people would settle their disputes and protect people in an anarchist society. By the way, Charles 2 has a great video on the marketplace and force fallacy. In fact, I'm going to be linking to 3 videos from Charles 2 on this subject, on the subject of anarchy and the differences between objectivists and libertarians. And, I usually don't like punting the ball, but Charles 2 just does a much better job at explaining this stuff than I do. So check out Charles 2 in the links down below.
The shootout at the OK Corral was not a case of competition. No, it was a case of gun control gone horribly awry. Whoever said it was a competition? Why all the straw manning? Maybe because you can't respond to what anarcho-capitalists actually say?
Bro, you're committing a strawman holocaust in this video. Killian might want to hire some private security to protect him in the glass house he's throwing from.
Governments are necessary because we need to be secure from force initiated by criminals, terrorists, and foreign invaders. The conclusion does not follow from the premise. There are many other ways we can protect ourselves from criminals and other aggressors, but you want a state to do it. But that state, far more often than not, ends up being a criminal or terrorist organization on its own. In the 20th century, governments killed 262 million of their own people, not counting wars or capital punishment. The number of private murders in the same time period? Just 9 million.
So by this logic, driving a car is bad because, after all, thousands of people die in car accidents each year. By this logic, nuclear power is bad because of the way nuclear power has been weaponized in the form of atomic bombs.
Government is bad because people have used government to slaughter millions of innocent people.
Of course, this ignores all of the benefits and the good things that government does, but notice the cognitive dissonance here. So according to Anarchists, communist Russia, Maoist China, Nazi Germany, the theocracy in Saudi Arabia, they're all the same because, after all, they're just governments that are slaughtering and terrorizing their own people. According to Anarchists, the ideological foundations that these repressive governments are built upon and the ideological foundations that their people tolerate and accept and even endorse, it's totally irrelevant in the eyes of the Anarchists.
The genius of the American system is that it limited government, reining it in by a constitution, with checks and balances and the provision that no law can be passed unless it is necessary and proper to the government's sole purpose, to protect individual rights, to protect against their violation by physical force. Yeah, that lasted, 30 seconds? And then Washington, at the behest of Hamilton, was sending 50,000 troops to put down people protesting the whiskey tax, the very kind of tax they just finished fighting a war to stop.
So there is truth to the first part, to the fact that the Constitution has been eroding and that government in America has only gotten bigger and bigger since day one. But Anarchists see government as this deterministic thing, this deterministic entity that will just keep growing bigger and bigger and becoming more authoritarian, again, while ignoring the ideological foundations. Even the most repressive government require at least some consent of the governed. A dictatorship could not last if it did not have at least some endorsement from a significant, if not majority, of the people in their country. The erosion of the Constitution and the growing statism in America is a result of the philosophically, intellectually, and morally bankrupt culture and politically apathetic culture in America. It's a result of people happily voting away their rights and their rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of property and happiness to a government because they think that government should tell people what to do and how to live. They think government should engineer society and take care of everyone and do what's right for everyone. So you have one portion of the population that wants bigger government and more authoritarianism, and then their opponents, the alleged defenders of freedom and capitalism and the Constitution, i.e. the conservatives, they lack the moral and intellectual backbone to stand up to these lunatics. And then you have another sector of the population. What is it? It's probably 50% or more of the voting populace, the eligible voters in America. They just simply sit elections out every year, every time there's an election. And this is a huge reason why Anarchists and libertarians have never been able to gain traction in the culture, much less politics. This is why Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro have been growing in popularity. They have answers. They may be wrong answers, but wrong answers are always better than no answers. And Anarchists have no answers outside of the realm of politics, and even then, even in the realm of politics, they still have wrong answers. So Anarchists want to get rid of government. They want to have this stateless society. Okay, then what? How does one live their life in a stateless society? What's good and what's bad? what's right and what's wrong. Should I go to church? Is religion good? How do I know what's true and false? Should I start a family? Should I pursue my career? Should I just live a hedonistic lifestyle like a playboy? Is it good to lie and cheat people even if it's for short-term benefits? Should I begin my day by eating a meat lover's pizza and drinking a pint of vodka before I go to work? Should I give all of my disposable income to charity and make sure the less fortunate are taken care of? Or should I invest it in my retirement account and look into investing in stocks and index funds? Should I even think about putting money away for retirement? Or should I just live here and now to the fullest without any consideration for the future? Should I exercise and read some self-help books on how to improve my life? Or is life just pointless and meaningless? And should I just smoke a joint and play video games? Again, Ancraps don't have answers to any questions short of politics. Now, Ayn Rand and objectivism are the remedy to this current philosophic crisis in the culture, because people that want to think for themselves and want to be productive are gonna want to be left alone, and likewise would never vote for authoritarian politicians. Anyway, good luck to all the Ancraps out there on convincing altruists why getting rid of government with its massive welfare state is a good idea.
Tragically, the original American theory of government was breached, shelved, trashed long ago. But that's another story. No, that's not another story! That's the point! Stop being such a binswanger!
Well, if you're curious, the story is called The Ominous Parallels, and it's written by Leonard Peikoff. And I'd recommend that every Ancrap read The Ominous Parallels, because you guys will learn how to connect the dots between ideas and actions. Connect the dots between philosophy and its logical consequences.
The anarchists do not object to retaliatory force, only to it being wielded by a government. Why? Because they say it excludes competitors. It sure does. It excludes vigilantes, lynch mobs, terrorists, and anyone else wanting to use force subjectively. Wow. Really? We come up with a logical, objective foundation for the non-aggression principle, and you just say it would be done subjectively? Any DDRO that operated that way would soon find itself losing customers because no one wants to put up with that kind of uncertainty. Oh, but I suppose the state isn't subjective at all. Yeah, the law just means...
Okay, it really is amazing how this guy fails to connect the dots. Again, between philosophy and its logical consequences, between ideas and their actions. So, what happens under anarchy? What if a group of white supremacists decide that they want to start and fund their own paramilitary group? Or what happens when a group of radical Muslims want to establish their own paramilitary group or terrorist organization? I don't even have to reach for hypotheticals in this example, given the existence of several Islamic totalitarian terrorist organizations throughout the world that are funded by various royal families and Islamic totalitarian governments. Yeah, the Saud royal family and the Islamic Republic of Iran, they would totally not fund any terrorist organizations in anarchist America. The Ku Klux Klan and the Aryan Brotherhood and their paramilitary organizations, they would totally abide by the non-aggression principle. And I have not even mentioned the history of street gangs and the mafia in America. How would all of these organizations and threat to liberty, how would they be dealt with in an anarchist society? I don't know, free market, I guess. Get the fuck out of here.
Whatever a bunch of politicians arbitrarily decided to scribble down on paper, but that's not at all subjective. So they can write down that you're not allowed to have a small piece of vegetable matter, but that's not subjective. Give me a break. 66% of Americans, 2/3, support legalizing marijuana, and government still won't do it. What if...
So he's saying that, oh, the law is just a piece of paper, and governments can just write down whatever they want and interpret it subjectively. Okay, well, aren't contracts just a piece of paper? If politicians cannot be trusted to enforce the law based on objective principles, then what makes anyone think that private courts could also be trusted to enforce their decisions objectively? What's stopping the private courts from being subjective? The Ancraps might be dumber than the communists. After all, they essentially want the same outcome. Why would anyone want to be productive in a communist society when the state can and will seize the rewards and the benefits of your productive effort? Likewise, why would anyone want to be productive in an anarchist society when anyone in society can and will seize the rewards and the benefits of their production? Why should anyone write a book or invent anything new or anything when anyone can just knock them off and take their ideas and seize the rewards of their productive effort so long as they can hire the biggest and most powerful guns?
That 66% could take their money elsewhere and say, we don't want to pay for enforcing that stupid law. How long do you think it would remain on the books then?
Well, people do somewhat have this option in America. For instance, he's talking about marijuana. Well, technically, if you live in a state where marijuana is criminalized and against the law, you can move to a different state like California or Washington or Colorado where marijuana is legal. Now, I know marijuana is still illegal by federal standards, although the federal government seems to be relaxed in enforcing this law. But again, the federal government is primarily supposed to be focused on things like national defense and foreign trade and international trade and foreign relations and all that stuff, while the states set their own laws and their own policies so long as they adhere to the Constitution. Not that Shane Killian really gives a rat's ass about the Constitution.
There can only be one supreme law of the land and only one government to enforce it. There shouldn't be any of either one.
Oh, so there should be no laws, and there should be no means of enforcing the law. And this is a huge hole in Ancrap logic. How can you have a society that's predicated on the non-aggression principle when it cannot even be enforced objectively? There should be no law. Well, how do you enforce that law? What happens when masses of people decide to incorporate their own towns and their own cities or even their own states, and they decide to pass legislation and make laws? What are the anarchists going to do? What are they gonna set up a coalition of private military and private police forces to crack down on them? Hey guys, we had an agreement. No laws here in anarchist America. This reminds me of that episode of Regular Show where Mordecai and Rigby go to that one place where there's no rules, and then after a while they decide how much of a nightmare this place is, and then they realize that there's no rule against setting rules. So then they start making a bunch of rules, and they apply because again, there's no rule against making rules. It's a complete contradiction.
State and local governments are necessarily subordinate to the federal government. Well, somebody hasn't read the Constitution. Try the 10th Amendment.
Yeah, try reading the Constitution. Now Killian likes the Constitution. Go figure. An Ancrap defending the document that established the federal government.
Could conflict among competing governments be taken care of by treaties? Treaties enforced by whom? Wow, you really can't think of any other way of doing this? You do realize that these kinds of agreements happen all the time in the business world, right? Where do you think we got things like the USB standard that allows us to buy things like cheap drives and plug into any computer made in the reasonably recent past, regardless of the manufacturer or even the country that made it? By the way, any part of this that mentions Ayn Rand will be ignored as anything she ever said should be. Sorry, but yes, she said some good things, but there were plenty of other people saying the same things, and they don't have all of the bigoted, anti-intellectual baggage you get with her. Sorry, but I prefer to get my philosophy from someone who doesn't make exceptions for the people she happens to call savages. Silly me.
That's right. Evade. Please run as hard as you can from Ayn Rand because you have nothing to fight back with. You have no honest or legitimate criticisms of objectivism, but you will steal parts of her philosophy that you like while throwing her under the bus like a thief, like a total ANCRAP coward would. And just to be clear, I'm not offended or triggered by any of this. In fact, I want ANCRAPs and libertarians, I want them to shit on Ayn Rand. I want them to throw her under the bus. I want them to mock and dismiss her as much as possible, because the more ANCRAPs like Shane Killian, the more libertarians shit on and disown Ayn Rand, the less confused people will be. So please, ANCRAPs and libertarians, keep shitting on Ayn Rand and go run to Murray Rothbard and Noam Chomsky.
A proper government functions according to objective, philosophically validated procedures as embodied in its entire legal framework, from its constitution.
Oh yeah, I also I forgot to mention his whole spiel about treaties and whatnot. So what's stopping other governments, say China or Russia or Saudi Arabia or anyone, from taking advantage of businesses in an anarchist state? What's stopping them from just completely robbing them and taking advantage of them, seizing their ships, not defending their intellectual property, if they don't have to answer to any possible threat of force or sanctions or anything?
Down to its narrowest rules and ordinances. Let's just move on.
This is just more proof that this guy has nothing. Just more, again, more evasion, deflection, straw man arguments, and insults.
Let's just move on. Let's not discuss Ayn Rand. What do you mean we want a competition in force? We only want a competition in police and courts. You said force is only proper in retaliation. Clearly that means you want government to intervene in voluntary affairs.
To carry out its function of protecting individual rights, the government must forcibly bar others from using force in ways that threaten the citizens' rights. Private force is force not authorized by the government, not validated by its procedural safeguards, and not subject to its supervision. Yeah, this is where you get things like gun control. This idea leads to tyranny and no other direction. People who have read actual philosophy, as in other than Ayn Rand, know that any...
Alright, so pause there. I'm currently reading Binswanger's book, How We Know, where he cites and criticizes various philosophers throughout history. Additionally, Leonard Peikoff has an entire course on Ayn Rand, the Ayn Rand Institute's campus, on the history of philosophy, where he goes all the way from ancient Greece until the post-Enlightenment. So yeah, again, more smears and strawmans.
Anyone can use force in defense of themselves or others, and any number of people can band together for their mutual protection. Frederick Bastiat said that the law was the collective organization of the individual right to lawful defense. The only legitimate action government can take here, then, is the same kind of mutual protection, but it cannot stop others from forming their own. But that's exactly what you want to do. The government has to regard such private force as a threat, i.e. as a potential violation of individual rights. Government is the potential violation of individual rights, and it never takes long for that potential to be realized. Read the Bill of Rights. Notice how it keeps restricting government, not private organizations, because that is who you need to worry about here.
Well, technically, everyone in society is a potential violator of individual rights. Does this mean you just get rid of everyone in society? That's the logic this guy is using. Well, government's a potential violator of individual rights, and it's just determined to just keep growing and becoming more oppressive, so we should just get rid of it. Well, you could say that about anyone in society.
The threat of force is force. In barring such private force, the government is retaliating against that threat. But simply having the capacity, or in your words, the potential to violate rights, is not the same as a threat. But those scribbles on paper absolutely are, because they state under no uncertain terms that if you have a bit of a certain plant or arrange flowers without a license or whatever, they will use force against you. That is a threat.
Does this guy just think that government is just this detached entity from society that's not beholden to the people? Again, does he just believe that government is just determined, just on this natural phase, this natural track to become this this growing entity that's going to become tyrannical and oppressive? I mean, despite all of the flaws in government and in America, all of the drawbacks and all the things government does wrong, it is still beholden to the people and still has pretty solid checks and balances. I mean, has this guy not watched the news for the last 2 fucking years? And all of these stories about Trump and Russia collusion and the FBI and the Democratic Party trying to dig up stuff on Trump to get impeached. All of these various courts, these district courts and the Supreme Court challenging Trump's decisions and policies on immigration and transgender bans and military and other matters. Does this guy think it's just some magical coincidence that these Sharia law countries have a significant Muslim majority in their countries, or does he just think that those tyrannical governments just evolved that way because that's what government does? Or the fact that communist revolutionaries have only managed to take over poorer, less educated agrarian societies throughout history, where the majority of people were willing to tolerate at least some form of slavery? Again, a total failure to connect the dots.
Note that a proper government does not prohibit a man from using force to defend himself in an emergency when recourse to the government is not available. It does when that person is defending himself from an agent of the state. In fact, that's when they go after the hardest. No matter how aggressive the cop was, no matter how justified the defense, you're now a cop killer and you get no sympathy. You get shot and killed on sight.
Well, yeah, and again, in a rational society, cops are not supposed to act that way. Again, read the Bill of Rights. We're supposed to have, we have amendments dealing with cruel and unusual punishment and things like due process. That's how it's supposed to be. More strawmanning and deflection.
But it does properly require him to prove objectively at a trial that he was acting in emergency self-defense. No, it doesn't. If you're defending yourself, you have to justify it to nobody. You're only defending yourself in court on this matter when you're falsely accused of being the aggressor yourself.
Nigga, get the fuck out of here.
So let me get this straight. You don't ever have to justify that you were using self-defense? Do I really have to point out the obvious issue with this line of thinking? So what's stopping anyone from just murdering someone in an anarchist society and just saying, well, I was acting in self-defense, don't bother taking me to a court of law to prove it because I don't have to justify anything? Holy shit.
Similarly, the government does not ban private guards, but it does properly bring private guards under its supervision by licensing them, and does not grant them any special rights or immunities. They remain subject to the government's authority and its laws. Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Government can give itself all the special rights and immunities that it wants, even though none of the rest of us can do that. Government is just a group of people. So where do they get this ethical justification for doing things that would be unethical for anyone else to do? This is basically divine right of kings, only without the kings. And he says they cannot make their own laws. Right, and that's a good thing. It's a bad thing the government can just make up whatever crap they want and that's the law, like it's some divine incantation or something. They write some words down on paper, then go through all the proper rituals, and it becomes the law.
Again, and philosophy would prevent this from happening. And look, we get the government that we deserve. Does this guy absolve all the blame from the American people who vote in these corrupt statist politicians? Does this guy absolve the media and the intellectuals for encouraging people and ruining their minds to the point where they want strongman and kings to take over to tell them what to do and how to live? No, government's just this separate group, this separate entity that's not beholden to anyone and is just determined to grow into an oppressive dictatorship.
In fact, of course, there is no conflict between individual rights and outlawing private force. Except, of course, that you have to inhibit individual rights in order to prevent individuals from contracting with that force. But details.
Uh-oh, retard alert!
So, do individuals have the right to use force or not? This is a rhetorical question that proves Shane Killian wrong either way. Either individuals do have the right to use force, which means the non-aggression principle goes right into the trash, or individuals do not have the right to use force, which means that they would not have the right to contract with private entities that use force on their fucking behalf. This blatant contradiction is a huge reason why anarchy makes no fucking sense. Ancraps think that evil people who turn governments into dictatorships would never try or think to impose their will via hired guns. So government is force, therefore government is bad, therefore we need to get rid of government. But also, it's totally okay and legitimate for individuals to use force in the free market.